All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this LinkedIn Live conversation on the human element and cybercrime. I'm Bradford Sims, president of Capital Technology University, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Dr. Mary Aiken, chair and professor of our cyberpsychology department here at Capital Tech. And she's also internationally recognized expert on the intersection of technology and human behavior. And I'll also add she's the founder of Forensic Cyberpsychology as well. At Capital Tech, our online higher ed degrees in cyberpsychology and forensic cyberpsychology include our online Masters of Research degrees and our online PhDs. They support advanced research into human behavior, digital environments, cyber risk, and cybercrime. As cyber threats become more sophisticated, it is becoming increasingly clear that cybersecurity is not only about systems and software, it's also about people, how we think, how we behave, how we trust, and how those human factors can be exploited or better protected. So welcome, Dr. Aiken. So I'm going to jump into questions because I know our time is limited in this 30 minutes. And at the end of it, talk a little bit about the Masters and Doc program for those who might be interested. And also we'll look if there's any questions. If we have any time, we might answer the online questions. But for those folks joining us for the first time, again, welcome to Capital Tech. We're located in Laurel, Maryland in the USA. And we only are involved in STEM programming at the bachelor's, master's, and doctoral levels. That's our specialty here in Maryland. And with that, I will ask my first question of Dr. Aiken. Many people are still unfamiliar with the term cyberpsychology. How do you define it, and why does it matter so much in understanding cybercrime today?
Thank you, Dr. Sims, or President Sims. So cyberpsychology is the study of psychological processes and behavior in digital and technology-mediated environments. And that definition comes from a publication, Cambridge University Press publication, which is Ethical Challenges in Digital Psychology and Cyberpsychology. And obviously, was an emerging discipline, and now it's an established discipline within applied psychology. My research interest has always been in the more forensic aspects of cyberpsychology, and I'm one of the how might I put it, founders of the field of forensic cyberpsychology. And forensic cyberpsychology is the interdisciplinary study of psychological processes in cyber behavior as they relate to digital forensics, cybercrime, and forensic investigation. And that definition comes from a publication by Dr. Marshall Rich, who's a recent graduate of our PhD program, and myself. And our paper was titled An Interdisciplinary Approach to Enhancing Cyber Threat Prediction, Utilizing Forensic Cyberpsychology and Digital Forensics. And that was published in the Journal of Forensic Sciences. So I'll post these definitions and the links to these papers in the chat below when we, or when you publish after the fact.
Sure. And this becomes live immediately on LinkedIn if you like to rewatch it. And we'll also post it through Capital Tech. So if you want to come back in, see it anytime. Okay, question number 2. When people think about cybercrime, they often think first about technical attacks. What are they missing when they overlook the human dimension?
Okay, so 2 things about the human dimension. You know, we talk about attacks on critical infrastructure. I would argue that human infrastructure is the most critical of infrastructures. And there's also a saying that the human is the weakest link in any secure system. I would argue against that. I would say the human is not the weakest link. It is actually just the most targeted entity. And the point is that when we think about cyber attacks in general, the vast majority, up in the 90th percentile of attacks, are actually facilitated by social engineering. And social engineering has everything to do with cyberpsychology and very little to do with technology. So I would argue that, people miss the facts, that the fact that many attacks they succeed by manipulating human behavior before they even touch a machine. So the real attack surface then has to include human trust, judgment, and attention. These are the attack vectors. And in an age of increasing deployment of AI systems by OCGs, organized crime groups, then we've got to really focus on how we can increase resilience and robustness in terms of human dimensions. So we want our systems to be robust, resilient, safe, and secure. But equally, it is imperative that the humans who operate and use those systems are psychologically robust, resilient, safe, and secure. And it is the combination, therefore, of a technological and a cyber psychological approach that delivers 360 resilience.
So just a side note, I mean, many years ago when I was at the University of Salford, they had a map of the city and they had embedded the crime where it was located by building. Is that something that type of data where you can see the locations of what's occurred and the type of crime that you can cross-reference to the psychology easy of who may have caused that crime as well?
Yeah, well, that taps into a whole area of psychology called environmental psychology, which actually looks at domain in terms of in a real world context. And I many years ago collaborated with a Professor Cantor, who's an expert in geographic profiling. So that's in a real world context. Where cyber psychology operates is that juxtaposition between cyberspace and the real world, and then distilling those relationships. And that's what makes it a cutting edge discipline. So we look at theories like routine activity theory, and it's triangulation. So to give your example, a crime is committed here, the perpetrator may live here, and they may go to work over here. So it's a triangulation to actually try, in a real world context, figure out how they might profile and ultimately intercept the perpetrator in terms of that triangulation in a geographic context. What gets really interesting is when you transpose routine activity to cyberspace and start thinking about cyberspace as an environment, and then start thinking about those intersections in terms of creating your behavioral profile. And again, there's some interesting literature and research that has been done in the area of routine activity theory, which is a standard criminological theoretical construct applied in cyber context. And that's 101 forensic cyberpsychology. So again, I'll post a link to some of the literature.
Excellent. Next question. What are some of the most common human vulnerabilities that cyber criminals exploit?
Well, what we see is that because the behavioral piece is the attack vector, we see exploitation of a number of human constructs. So, for example, trust or urgency or fear or authority or curiosity. And what are these are called in a psychological context is they're called cognitive biases. So effectively, if you take urgency, or if you take, say, for example, authority as a cognitive bias, we are, as humans, predisposed to reacting to the authority heuristic or the authority cognitive bias. What does that mean? It means if you, President Sims, send an email to somebody who works in one of the departments and tell them that they need to urgently do something, then they are predisposed to accepting that instruction and acting on it. In the same way, if you get an email from your boss in an organization telling you to urgently do something, you are naturally more inclined to follow that instruction rather than not. If you get something from your bank, or if you get something from revenue, again, all of these attack vectors are designed to trigger those built-in heuristics and biases that we as humans in an experiential context develop over time. These attack vectors are also used by cyber criminals. So let's take trust as, a human, a heuristic. We grow up in collaborative societies where the inclination is to establish trust in a real world context. So how do you establish trust? Well, you get to know somebody, you meet them, and you use the senses that you've developed over, from a very old piece of technology, which has been about 1 million years in development, which is the human brain, wet technology. And you use your vision detection systems, haptic systems like handshake, touching, smell, auditory. And those senses serve us very well in a real world context to make a judgment call about somebody who's presenting themselves, say, for interview. They say that anybody conducting an interview within a real world context, that effectively within the first 60 seconds, they've made a judgment call about this person, just on how they present, how they introduce themselves, how they hold themselves, how they visually present. And when we move to cyber, then those senses that have been developed in that way over time may not serve us as well. So we have to start thinking about additional sensory capacity. So let's go back to trust. Trust can be established in a real world context using real world senses. But how do we establish trust online? And in an era of deep fakes, in an era of AI-generated voices, in an era of, the scaling of cyber attacks, effectively, trust can fail us in cyber contexts. And therefore, we have to move towards a zero trust, always verify model. And I describe it as the trust paradox. Paradoxically, zero trust, always verify actually helps to establish trust online.
Excellent. I'm just going to, because of time, forgive me, I'm going to write down the questions. So next question, why do phishing, impersonation, and other forms of social engineering continue to work so effectively, even on experienced professionals?
Because, come back to the heuristics piece, they're designed to trigger reaction before reflection. And the point is that even seasoned professionals can be vulnerable in this context, particularly when they're busy, tired, distracted, or under pressure. In psychology, we call this cognitive overload. And cyber defenders in particular can be vulnerable to cognitive overload just because of the nature of their work, the extreme demands.
I see. And just moving on to the next question. One of the important ideas in cyber psychology in this field is that victims should not simply be dismissed as careless. How should we think more constructively about victimization?
I think that we have to move away from sort of victim blaming in terms of when somebody is a victim of cyber fraud, or when somebody within an organizational context is a victim of, a breach or a phishing attempt, because effectively it's an increasingly asymmetric battle. Back in the day, we're just talking about, say, humans in terms of another human trying to, breach a system or compromise or socially engineer the human victim on the other side. But now you're talking about AI-augmented attacks. And, you have to sort of visually conceptualize that as something with the power of ChatGPT being focused on an individual. And that is something that, very few people could withstand in terms of the sophistication of that attack. So rather than blaming, we have to think about how can we support humans in this context, and how can we build online safety technologies that actually can help humans in the context of combating an AI-driven attack, an AI response, if you will.
Do you have any thoughts on that about the different models out there besides ChatGPT? Any difference? Is it the same? How do you perceive the different versions?
Well, we're seeing constant evolutions. I mean, you've seen, Glasswing and Mythos and, all sorts of evolutions in this space. So what it is, it's a cyber arms race, if you will, constant evolutions in technology. And those evolutions can be used for, greater protection, for greater good, if you will. But equally and oppositely, they're also being used by perpetrators, by organized crime groups. So they're being used in both attack and defense. And that's the state of flux that we find ourselves in.
Gotcha. Next question. How do stress, distraction, fatigue, and cognitive overload affect cybersecurity decision making?
Well, what they do is they reduce attention and effectively put people in a position where they're increasingly reliant on taking shortcuts, which is into the heuristics and the quick and the rule of thumb and that sort of decision making. And that makes people more vulnerable to deception. The point is that to be on the receiving end of these attacks, burnout is not just a well-being issue within the workforce, in particular, say, when you're talking about cyber defenders, it's also a cybersecurity issue.
What can cyberpsychology tell us about the motivations behind cybercriminal behavior themselves?
So in the area of cyber behavioral profiling, what we do is we look at motivation in terms of what is motivating the offender to do, or the cyber criminal to do, or the threat actor, or the nation state actor, or the hacktivist or the activist. What is motivating them to engage in this behavior? And the point is that to actually, these attacks are not driven by financial reward alone. Very often it could also be a human trait, like the need for revenge or a grievance, or it could be ideology, or it could be kudos in the sense of belonging within some sort of like activism group. Or it can be what they call script kiddies, just for fun, thrill seeking, and curiosity. So in terms of creating these behavioral profiles, and I know one of our recent graduates, Melissa Martineau, has done, she did an excellent, her PhD was excellent in this area in terms of doing the first systematic review in the area of cyber behavioral profiling. And again, I'll post a link to that paper. But when you take those sort of motivations into cyber context, what you can see is that online environments can accelerate and amplify these motivations. And what we see is that whenever cyber environments actually engage with base human drivers, and this is 101 cyber psychology, for example, online disinhibition, or the power of anonymity or perceived anonymity online, can actually amplify and accelerate these events.
What are organizations still getting wrong when it comes to awareness, training, and building a true culture of cybersecurity?
I think the problem is that too many organizations actually treat cybersecurity as a data or information problem instead of a behavior problem. And yes, awareness matters, but people also need systems that are, and cultures that are designed around real human behavior. So what you'll see as an example is many organizations spamming or launching sort of phishing attacks on their own employees as part of some sort of educational and awareness raising program. But increasingly, we're seeing that employees do not like being treated as lab rats, where somebody is basically treating them as some sort of experimental design and see how they react. And that doesn't help with transparency and reporting. So I think a culture of, first of all, designing systems with humans in mind, first and foremost. Secondly, deploying it in the context of online safety technologies, which we've had 50 or 60 years of cybersecurity. And cybersecurity protects your data, your systems, your devices. It does not protect what it is to be human online, and that's where we need online safety technologies. And thirdly, inculcating a culture of reporting when something has happened, to say this has happened, and actually being praised for that and recognized for that, rather than victimized.
Well, then what does more behaviorally informed cybersecurity look like in practice?
It means helping employees or users to make safer choices, and that's done through design, clearer communication, better defaults, and less alert fatigue. Good security, good cybersecurity should support humans, not work against them.
All right. How is AI changing the human side of cybercrime, particularly in areas like persuasion, impersonation, and trust?
So AI is making deception, in terms of social engineering, more scalable, more personalized, and more persuasive. And what that means is that the human element is becoming more important, not less. So if you think about, say, prototypical man in the middle attacks, in terms of you might be making a down payment on a purchase and your email could be compromised, a hacker could go into your emails and look at your correspondence between you and the party that you're engaging in the transaction with. And that would be very manual and labor intensive. Imagine a dark AI system getting into your email and creating that behavioral profile of how you talk to that third party, whether it's your solicitor, lawyer, your bank, and then how they respond to you. And then for that entity to create an interception based on all of that knowledge, that is going to make that attack far more plausible, more persuasive, more personalized, and arguably more successful.
I see. So as we get near the end, next question would be for leaders, educators, and professionals watching today, what is one thing they should do differently as a result of what we now know from cyberpsychology?
I think from a cyberpsychological perspective, organizations have to stop treating human behavior as an afterthought and start designing security around it. So, going back to what I said earlier, the future of cyber resilience depends on combining technical expertise with behavioral insight. And what we see is many of our students on our doctoral programs in cyberpsychology and in forensic cyberpsychology already have PhDs in computer science or in engineering or in data science. And effectively, they are upskilling by incorporating a higher level degree, master's or PhD, in terms of their qualifications, their repertoire, and being able to apply that in their employment context.
All right, as we near the end, if you could leave our audience with one key message about the human element in cybercrime, what would it be?
I would say the key message is that every cyber incident has a human context. Cybersecurity is not only, again, about protecting systems, it's about understanding people. Coming back to what I said, the human is not the weakest link, it is the most targeted link. And therefore, we need to be cognizant of that and design for that.
Excellent. Thank you for all the information today in our LinkedIn Live. And thank you for joining us and sharing your experience today. At Capital Technology University, we are proud to support this kind of interdisciplinary work through our programs in both cyber psychology and forensic cyber psychology. Just to give the listeners a little bit of information about the degree areas that we have here at Capital Tech that Dr. Aiken manages. So we really have two types that you can look to. You can do a master's degree, which is all online research. You'll have a thesis chair and or a doctorate all online, and you have a dissertation chair for either cyber psychology or forensic cyber psychology. And Dr. Aiken and her department really they manage the thesis chairs and dissertations chairs for you that will be working with you throughout the product that your research product is what they're focused towards. So she oversees that quality from above as she helps these folks manage and work with you through your program areas. And every month, if you like, you can go to Capital Tech's website and sign up for an online open house for a master's degree to learn more, or an online open house for the doctoral degrees if you like to learn more about that. And obviously, as I mentioned earlier, Capital Tech being in Maryland, we're small and we're STEM only focused. But we do have over 750 students globally just studying the online doctoral degrees in every continent of the world except Antarctica. We are trying to find somebody down there. So if you're living in Antarctica, you send me an email today. We'll get you hooked up. So we're very proud of that. So we have many graduates from across the globe right now in the online doc programs. Most of the bachelor's degrees are on campus, so you have to come here and live on campus. And at the master's degree, the cyber psychology and forensic cyber psychology is online. If you want to study in campus, the only one you can do at the master's level is our computer science, but you can choose a focus area like AI or data science or something like that as well. So in our cyber psychology, forensic cyber psychology area, our first degree really launched in 2021 for the PhD in cyber psychology. And as we have students going through the programs, right, mostly there's many of them in the doc side, lesser in the master's side. And if you were to come on board and do a doc degree, typically we're going to tell you it's going to take 3.3 years to go through the system and you collect your classes and complete your research project. We do have 24 students that of the masters in doc who have qualified and graduated as of this coming Saturday, May 2nd. I believe that's Saturday. So that's a total in the program since 21. But currently studying at the master's and doc level, we have 61 students in these two areas, cyber psychology, forensic cyber psychology studying. So again, if you come to the open house or if you email our admissions team, they're happy to talk to you more about both areas, what you need to study and all that. If you are interested in a doctoral degree, you do need an equivalent of a master's degree from the States. So again, we evaluate globally where you've completed that equivalent work. If you don't have a US master's degree, and if you don't have a master's level equivalent, whether it's in the States or abroad, you could do the master's and go straight into the doctorate in that area if you choose to do so, and have one of the several dissertation chairs who are already experts in this area that Dr. Aiken manages work one-on-one with you throughout your research product. So we invite you to learn more about Capital Tech, and certainly if you start on the web page for cyber psychology, forensic cyber psychology, learn more about it. Dr. Aiken does have her own website. It's full of information. You can also purchase her book online from there. She does speak across the globe, so you may be able to catch her at one of many events. I don't have a list of when her next one is, but I do know she's quite busy, and certainly we're lucky to catch her at home today in Ireland. I don't see the dogs, so you must have to put away for the LinkedIn Live.
This is my office here, and yeah, this is the book, The Cyber Effect. So I wrote that. It was published in 2016, and in fact, I dropped the entire PDF into GPT and asked it to analyze, of all the predictions I made in this book, how many came through of the major predictions. And it came back and it said that out of the 10 major predictions, 8 had come true completely and 2 partially. So I was thrilled with that. And on my bookshelf here behind me, you'll see all the editions of the cyber effect around the world. And there are now, I think it's been translated into 14 languages, but I'm particularly proud of the fact that there is an Arabic edition, a Russian edition, and I'm on my 3rd print of the Chinese edition. And my little book got past the Great Firewall of China, my little tech book. And I'm delighted with that because it speaks to the global appeal of cyberpsychology. And I think just one final thing I want to say is that if your background is in social or behavioral sciences, you're welcome into the cyberpsychology degree programs because you will learn a lot more about technology. And equally, if you're from a pure tech background, you're welcome onto our programs as well because you will learn a lot more about cyber behavioral science.
Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for attending today, and thank you, Dr. Aiken, for presenting today wonderful information. And we hope to see you all on a future LinkedIn Live or at one of our open houses. Thank you.
Thank you, President Sims. Thank you.